The Montana Territory, 1875. Where the untamed prairie met the jagged teeth of the Rocky Mountains, a man could lose himself in the vastness, and Ethan York preferred it that way. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rolling grasslands as Ethan adjusted his weathered Stetson. At 26, his face remained untouched by the deep lines that marked older ranch hands, though 2 years of working this harsh country had left its mark in other ways. His lean frame had hardened, shoulders broadened from breaking horses and mending fences. The elements had kissed his skin golden, contrasting with eyes the color of mountain lakes, a clear, piercing blue that rarely softened for anyone. He'd come to Montana to escape memories of the war between the states, seeking solitude among the endless horizons and star-filled skies. The Double Cross Ranch had given him purpose, if not peace. Breaking mustangs suited him, their wildness mirrored his own untamed spirit, their resistance to the bridle an echo of his refusal to be bound to anything or anyone. No man stands long in this country without falling, old Tom had warned him when he'd first arrived. Either the winters break you, the work kills you, or some woman ropes you tighter than any calf. Ethan had laughed at the grizzled foreman's words. Not me, he'd vowed. The frontier's no place for love, just survival and solitude. That suits me fine. 2 years later, he still believed it. Love belonged in the settled East, not in territories where nature and man alike could kill you without warning. Out here, attachment was just another word for vulnerability, and vulnerability got men buried beneath lonely wooden crosses. Riding the fence line of the Double Cross, Ethan spotted movement in the distance, a flash of chestnut hide catching the sunlight. He squinted, pulling his horse to a stop. A wild mustang, separated from its band, galloped across the prairie with a freedom that stirred something inside him. Beautiful and unbroken, its movements fluid as water over stone. Jeb Marshall, the ranch owner, had been clear. They needed more stock horses for the upcoming cattle drive. Any wild mustangs Ethan could capture and break would earn him extra pay, money he needed if he ever hoped to claim his own piece of this vast country. "Come on, Thunder," he murmured to his black gelding. "Let's get ourselves a wild one." The chase lasted nearly an hour, Ethan's skill as a horseman tested with every feint and dodge of the chestnut mare. She was clever, using the terrain to her advantage, doubling back when he least expected. Not just wild but cunning, a rare combination that would make her valuable once broken. When he finally maneuvered her into a narrow canyon and threw his lasso with practiced precision, capturing her in a clean catch around the neck, Ethan felt an unexpected twinge of regret. Something so free being bound against its will seemed almost a crime against nature itself. But such sentiments were luxuries a working cowboy couldn't afford. The mare fought the rope fiercely, rearing and pulling, her eyes rolling white with fear and defiance. It took all Ethan's strength and patience to lead her back to the ranch, the sun sinking behind the mountains by the time they arrived. "That's a fine piece of horseflesh," Jeb Marshall commented, leaning against the corral fence as Ethan secured the mustang. "Where'd you find her?" "Eastern foothills," Ethan replied, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his brow. "She gave me quite the chase." "I bet she did," Marshall's weathered face crinkled with amusement. "She's got spirit. Might be too much for our needs." Ethan studied the mare, admiring her proud stance despite her capture. "I'll break her," he promised. "Give me 2 weeks." Marshall nodded slowly. "She's yours to work with then." "But Ethan," he paused, his expression turning serious, "don't break her spirit completely. Best horses keep a bit of that fire inside." Over the next several days, Ethan approached the task methodically. The mare, whom he'd started calling Ember for her chestnut coat that seemed to glow like coals in the sunset, resisted every attempt to tame her. She kicked at the stall walls, refused feed from his hand, and pinned her ears flat against her head whenever he approached. "You're just making this harder on yourself," he told her on the 4th morning, voice low and even as he slowly entered her stall with a halter. "Sooner or later, you'll learn to accept the way things are." Ember snorted, backing into the corner, eyes never leaving him. There was intelligence in those dark eyes, an assessment that seemed almost human in its intensity. That afternoon, as Ethan was working with her in the round pen, getting her accustomed to the feel of a saddle blanket on her back, a wagon appeared on the horizon. Visitors were uncommon at the isolated ranch, and he paused his work to watch its approach, one hand keeping the mare steady. The wagon drew closer, revealing two passengers, an older man with a silver beard driving and beside him a young woman. Something about her posture, straight-backed and attentive, caught Ethan's attention even before he could make out her features. As the wagon pulled into the ranch yard, Ethan handed the mare off to young Billy, one of the ranch hands, and walked over to greet the visitors. The older man set the brake and climbed down stiffly. "Afternoon," he called. "Looking for Jeb Marshall." "He's in the main house," Ethan replied, then froze as the young woman descended from the wagon. She moved with unexpected grace, her simple blue calico dress unable to disguise a natural elegance. Wheat blonde hair was pulled back in a practical braid, though a few strands had escaped to frame a face that struck Ethan with its quiet beauty. Not the painted prettiness of saloon girls, but something more elemental: high cheekbones flushed with the sun, a determined chin, and eyes the color of sage after rain. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying the hint of an accent he couldn't place. "I am Olivia Grayson. This is my father, Dr. Harold Grayson." Ethan removed his hat, suddenly conscious of the dust covering his clothes and the horsehair clinging to his shirt. "Ethan York, ma'am, I work for Mr. Marshall." Her gaze moved past him to the corral where Billy was still holding Ember. Something flickered across her features, recognition, then distress. "Is that," she started, then stopped herself, composing her expression, "a beautiful horse you have there?" Before Ethan could respond, Jeb Marshall emerged from the house, greeting the doctor warmly. "Harold, you finally made it. We were beginning to think you'd changed your mind about settling in these parts." "The journey took longer than expected," Dr. Grayson replied, shaking Marshall's hand. "But we're here now, ready to establish my practice." Marshall turned to Olivia with a grandfatherly smile. "And this must be your daughter. Welcome to Montana Territory, Miss Grayson." "Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Your correspondence has been most helpful in preparing us." Her voice was composed, but Ethan noticed her gaze drifting repeatedly toward the corral. "You'll stay with us tonight," Marshall insisted. "Too late to continue on to town now. Mrs. Marshall will be delighted for the female company." As the group moved toward the house, Ethan returned to the corral, puzzled by Miss Grayson's reaction to the mare. Something about her demeanor bothered him, a tension he couldn't explain. Shaking off the feeling, he focused on the task at hand, leading Ember back to her stall for the evening. That night, after a dinner where Ethan had said little, content to observe the newcomers, he headed to the bunkhouse only to find himself taking a detour past the stables. A soft murmuring caught his attention as he approached Ember's stall. Standing in the shadows, he watched as Olivia Grayson stood before the stall, speaking quietly to the mare. To his astonishment, Ember, who had pinned her ears at every ranch hand who'd approached, was stretched forward, nostrils flaring gently, ears pricked in attention. "I know," Olivia whispered, her hand outstretched but not touching the horse. "I know it's frightening, but you must be patient." The intimacy of the moment made Ethan feel like an intruder, but curiosity rooted him in place. How did this Eastern doctor's daughter know how to approach a wild horse, and why did the mare respond to her when it had fought him at every turn? "Miss Grayson," he said finally, stepping forward. "Might not be safe for you here." She startled, turning quickly, but showed no embarrassment at being caught. "Mr. York, I apologize if I'm intruding." "Not intruding, just," he searched for the right words, "surprising. That mare hasn't taken to anyone since I brought her in." A shadow crossed Olivia's face. "Wild things recognize each other, perhaps." She glanced back at Ember. "She's magnificent. A true mustang." "You know horses?" he asked, unable to keep the skepticism from his voice. Something hardened in her expression. "I was raised around them. My mother's family owned a horse farm in Kentucky before the war." She lifted her chin. "Not all knowledge belongs exclusively to men, Mr. York." The rebuke, gentle as it was, caught him off guard. Most women he'd encountered since coming west were either hardened by frontier life or too genteel to speak their minds so directly. "I meant no offense, Miss Grayson." Her expression softened. "None taken, it's just." She looked back at Ember, who was watching their exchange with alert eyes. "She reminds me of something I've lost." An unexpected thread of connection formed between them in that moment, recognition of a shared understanding of loss, though its nature remained unspoken. "I should return to the house," she said after a moment. "My father will wonder where I've gone." Ethan nodded, stepping aside to let her pass. "Good night, Miss Grayson." "Good night, Mr. York." She paused at the stable door. "Be gentle with her. The wild ones, they break differently than the others." Her words lingered with him long after she'd gone, echoing in his mind as he lay awake in his bunk that night. The wild ones break differently. He couldn't shake the feeling that Olivia Grayson understood something about the mare, and perhaps about him, that he had yet to grasp himself. The next morning, Dr. Grayson and his daughter prepared to continue their journey to the growing settlement of Pine Ridge, 10 miles east, where the doctor planned to establish his practice. Ethan found himself rising earlier than necessary, making excuses to be in the yard as they loaded their wagon. "Mr. York," Olivia acknowledged him with a nod as he approached, her blonde hair neatly braided again, though today she wore a dress of soft green that heightened the color of her eyes. "Miss Grayson," he replied, hat in hand, "I hope you found your accommodations comfortable." "Very much so." Mrs. Marshall was most gracious. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when Dr. Grayson called for his daughter's assistance. Ethan cleared his throat. "Miss Grayson, might I ask, last night, how did you get the mare to trust you so quickly?" She paused, considering him carefully before answering. "I didn't try to control her. Sometimes trust comes not from asserting power but from offering respect." Before he could respond, Marshall emerged from the house with his wife, carrying a basket of provisions for the travelers. Goodbyes were exchanged, and moments later, the wagon was rolling down the long drive, taking Olivia Grayson away. Ethan watched until it disappeared over the horizon, then turned toward the corral where Ember awaited him. Offering respect, not asserting power. It was contrary to everything he'd learned about breaking horses, yet something about the idea resonated with him. That day, he approached Ember differently. Instead of forcing the issue, he simply spent time in her presence, talking quietly, moving slowly. By evening, she allowed him to stroke her neck briefly, the first voluntary contact she'd permitted. 2 days later, Marshall approached him as he worked with the mare. "Making progress, I see." Ethan nodded, surprised at his own sense of accomplishment over such a small victory. "She's coming along." "Good. Because I need you to ride to Pine Ridge tomorrow. Mrs. Marshall has a package for Dr. Grayson and his daughter." Marshall eyed him with a knowing look. "Figured you wouldn't mind the errand." Ethan kept his expression neutral. "Happy to help." "I'm sure you are," Marshall replied with a hint of amusement. "You can take the new mare if you think she's ready for a short ride, test how your training's coming along." The following morning found Ethan riding toward Pine Ridge, Ember beneath him, tense but responsive. He'd saddled her for the first time that morning, expecting a fight, but she'd accepted the saddle with only minimal resistance. Now, as they traveled the rutted road to town, he found himself oddly nervous at the prospect of seeing Olivia again. Pine Ridge was little more than a wide spot in the road, a single street lined with false-fronted buildings, a church under construction at one end, and the inevitable saloon doing brisk business at the other. Dr. Grayson had established his practice in a small clapboard building with fresh paint and a newly hung shingle. Dr. H. Grayson, physician and surgeon. Ethan dismounted, tying Ember to the hitching post, and paused to straighten his clean shirt before knocking on the door. It swung open to reveal Olivia, her sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back beneath a kerchief. "Mr. York," she said, surprise evident in her voice, "is something wrong at the ranch?" "No, ma'am," he replied, suddenly feeling foolish with the small package in his hands. "Mrs. Marshall asked me to deliver this to you and your father." How thoughtful. She accepted the package, then her gaze shifted past him to Ember, her eyes widened. "You rode her here already?" Ethan couldn't help the pride that crept into his voice. "She did well, took to the saddle easier than expected." "May I?" Olivia gestured toward the horse. "Of course." She approached Ember slowly, speaking in that same soft voice Ethan had heard in the stable. The mare's ears pricked forward, nostrils flaring in recognition. "Hello, beautiful," Olivia murmured, gently stroking the horse's muzzle. Ember leaned into the touch, displaying an affection she'd never shown Ethan. She remembers you, he observed, coming to stand beside them. Horses never forget, Olivia replied, her fingers tracing the white blaze on Ember's face. Something in her tone made Ethan study her more closely. Miss Grayson, he began carefully, you seem to know this horse particularly well. She stilled, her hand resting on Ember's neck. For a moment he thought she might evade the question, but then she met his gaze directly. Her name is Aurora, she said quietly. She was mine before the war. My father's plantation bordered the Grayson family home in Kentucky. We married when I was 18, just before the fighting began. Ethan absorbed this information, confusion clear on his face. But how did she end up here, in Montana territory? Olivia's expression grew distant. When Union forces requisitioned horses from the area, they took her. I thought I'd never see her again. She shook her head slightly. When my husband died at Shiloh, father and I eventually moved west for a fresh start. Never did I imagine I would find her here. The revelation stunned Ethan. Not only was the mare already trained, or had been, but she belonged to Olivia Grayson. The wild mustang he'd prided himself on capturing was someone else's lost beloved companion. I'm sorry, he said, the words inadequate even to his own ears. I didn't know. How could you? Her smile was tinged with sadness. War scatters everything to the winds, people, animals, hopes. Finding her here feels almost like Providence, he offered when she trailed off. Yes, she looked at him then, really looked at him, as though seeing past the dusty cowboy exterior to something deeper. You've been kind to her. I can tell. Not at first, he admitted, but your words the other night about offering respect rather than control, they changed my approach. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only when the door to the doctor's office opened and Dr. Grayson emerged. Olivia, oh Mr. York, good day to you. Introductions were made again, explanations given for Ethan's presence. As the conversation continued, Ethan found himself watching Olivia's interactions with her father, the ease between them, the clear affection. It had been years since he'd allowed himself to remember his own family, lost to fever before the war had even begun. You must stay for lunch, Dr. Grayson insisted. We were just about to eat, and there's plenty. Ethan started to decline, but Olivia added her own invitation. Please do join us, Mr. York. I'd like to hear how Aurora came to be at the Double Cross. He couldn't refuse her. Over a simple meal in the small rooms behind the doctor's office, Ethan found himself talking more than he had in months, describing how he'd spotted the mare in the foothills, the chase that had ensued, and his admiration for her spirit. She fought the rope like nothing I'd seen before, he told them. Most mustangs resist, but she had a determination that was different. She was trying to get home, Olivia said softly. She must have escaped whoever had her after the army took her. The conversation shifted to Dr. Grayson's plans for his practice, the needs of the growing community, and the changes coming to the territory. Throughout the meal, Ethan found himself drawn to Olivia's intelligence and quiet strength. She spoke knowledgeably about horses, medicine, and even politics, subjects most women he'd encountered either knew little about or pretended ignorance of for propriety's sake. As the meal concluded, an uncomfortable realization settled over Ethan. The mare, Aurora, rightfully belonged to Olivia. His job had been to break her for the ranch's use, but knowing what he knew now, that seemed impossible. Miss Grayson, he said finally, about Aurora, she's yours by rights. Olivia looked at him with surprise. Mr. York. Ethan, please. Ethan, his name on her lips, sent an unexpected warmth through him. While I appreciate the sentiment, I have no claim to her anymore. War changes ownership as surely as it changes landscapes. But she knows you, responds to you. She glanced toward the window where Aurora was visible, tied to the hitching post. Animals adapt, she's yours now, or rather Mr. Marshall's. Dr. Grayson cleared his throat. Perhaps a compromise is possible. If Mr. Marshall is amenable, Olivia could help with the mare's training. It would benefit both the horse and my daughter, who I know misses riding. The idea took root immediately in Ethan's mind. I believe Mr. Marshall would agree to that arrangement. He values well-trained horses. And so it was decided. Ethan would return to the ranch and speak with Marshall, proposing that Olivia be allowed to assist with Aurora's training. It was a thin excuse for continued interaction, but one that satisfied propriety while serving practical purposes. As he prepared to depart, Olivia walked with him to where Aurora waited. "Thank you," she said simply, "for listening, for understanding." "I haven't done anything worth thanking," he replied, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, the late afternoon sun catching golden highlights in her hair. "You've shown kindness, Ethan York. That's rarer than you might think." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of possibilities neither had considered before. As he mounted Aurora and tipped his hat in farewell, Ethan realized that for the first time since arriving in Montana, he was looking forward to tomorrow with more than resignation. There was anticipation there, a feeling he'd almost forgotten. True to his expectations, Marshall readily agreed to the arrangement. "Makes perfect sense," he said after Ethan explained the situation. "If the mare was trained once, having someone who knows her will make your job easier." The next 3 weeks established a rhythm. 3 times a week, Ethan would ride to Pine Ridge to collect Olivia for training sessions with Aurora. They would work with the mare in the morning, then share a simple meal before he escorted her back to town. During these rides and training sessions, their conversations deepened. Ethan found himself sharing stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his brief time at university before the war, and his aimless wandering afterward that had eventually led him to Montana. Olivia spoke of her own past, her marriage at 18 to James Grayson, her father's brother's son, a union of family interests as much as affection, the loss of him at Shiloh, and her determination to forge a new life alongside her father. "I loved him," she admitted as they sat beneath a cottonwood tree during a midday break, Aurora grazing peacefully nearby, "but I was so young. Sometimes I wonder if what I felt was love or simply the idea of it." Ethan understood. At 26, he felt decades older than the idealistic youth who had once believed in causes worth fighting for. "War has a way of forcing us to grow up all at once," he said, leaving no time for natural progression. She studied him, her green eyes thoughtful. "You never speak of what you did during the war." "No," he agreed, "I don't." She nodded, accepting his reticence. It was one of the things he appreciated about her, her respect for boundaries, her understanding of when not to press. As weeks passed and summer deepened toward autumn, Aurora's training progressed remarkably. With Olivia's guidance, Ethan learned techniques for working with the mare that relied on partnership rather than domination. The horse responded beautifully, her natural intelligence flourishing under their combined approach. "She's ready," Olivia declared one crisp September morning, watching as Aurora performed a complicated series of movements under Ethan's guidance. "You could take her on the cattle drive next week with no concerns." The cattle drive. Ethan had almost forgotten the impending 2-week journey to deliver the ranch's herd to the railroad junction. It would be his first extended absence since beginning his work with Olivia. "Will you continue visiting while I'm gone?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "Aurora would miss you." A smile played at the corners of her mouth. Would Aurora be the only one? The direct question caught him off guard. In the weeks of their acquaintance they had maintained a careful propriety, their growing attachment acknowledged only in glances and occasional, seemingly accidental touches. "No," he admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "She wouldn't." Olivia's cheeks colored slightly, but her gaze remained steady. "Then I shall have to visit, for Aurora's sake, of course." That evening, as Ethan rode back to the ranch alone, having escorted Olivia home earlier, he found himself contemplating the unexpected turn his life had taken. The solitude he had once craved now felt empty compared to hours spent in Olivia's company. Her intelligence challenged him, her quiet strength commanded his respect. And her rare smiles, those he found himself working to earn, savoring each one. The cattle drive loomed ahead, 2 weeks away from the ranch, from Pine Ridge, from her. The prospect, once routine, now felt like an unwelcome interruption. But it was also necessary work, and the additional pay would bring him closer to his goal of purchasing land of his own someday. Land of his own. The dream had always been solitary, a cabin, some horses, independence. Now, unbidden, the image included a woman with wheat blonde hair and sage-green eyes, standing beside him on a porch as the sun set over mountains that belonged to them both. The thought both terrified and exhilarated him. The night before his departure, Ethan made a decision. After his regular duties were complete, he rode to Pine Ridge, arriving at the doctor's residence as twilight descended. "Doctor." Grayson answered his knock, surprise evident in his expression. "Ethan, we weren't expecting you today." "I apologize for the late call, sir. I was hoping to speak with Miss Grayson briefly before leaving on the drive tomorrow." The older man studied him for a moment, then nodded. "She's in the garden around back." Ethan found her among late-blooming flowers, gathering the last of the season's herbs as daylight faded. She looked up at his approach, pleasure and surprise mingling in her expression. "Ethan, is something wrong?" "No," he said, removing his hat. "I wanted to see you before I left." She set her basket down, wiping her hands on her apron. "You'll only be gone 2 weeks." 2 weeks suddenly seems a very long time. The simple statement hung between them, its implications clear. Olivia's expression softened. "It does," she agreed quietly. Ethan took a step closer. "I've been thinking about what happens after I return." "Have you?" "Aurora's training is essentially complete. We'll have no reason to continue our arrangement." Pain flickered briefly across her features before she composed them. "That's true. You've accomplished what you set out to do. But I find myself hoping for reasons to continue seeing you." The words came easier than he expected, months of frontier solitude giving way to a truth he could no longer deny. "If you were amenable." Olivia looked at him directly, the fading light catching the gold in her hair. At 23, she possessed a maturity beyond her years, tempered by loss but not hardened by it. "I would be very amenable, Ethan York." Relief and joy surged through him. Emboldened, he reached for her hand, which she gave freely. "Upon my return, might I call on you properly?" "With your father's permission, of course." "I believe he would welcome it," she said, her fingers warm against his calloused palm. "He speaks quite highly of you." "And you?" he asked, his voice dropping lower. "What do you speak of me?" A smile played at her lips. "Perhaps you should return safely from your drive, and I might tell you." It was flirtation, gentle and proper, yet undeniably present. Ethan felt a grin spread across his face, unfamiliar after so long. That strong motivation for a swift and careful journey. They stood in the gathering darkness, hands still joined, the moment stretching between them with unspoken possibilities. Finally, reluctantly, Ethan released her hand. "I should go, early start tomorrow." "Be safe," she said, and the simple wish carried more weight than elaborate declarations might have. "I will return to you," he promised, the words a vow he hadn't planned but meant with his whole heart. As he rode back to the ranch under a canopy of stars, Ethan marveled at the transformation of his outlook in such a short time. The frontier remained harsh and unforgiving, but no longer did he see it as a place where connections were liabilities. Perhaps, he thought, watching the moon rise over distant mountains, love wasn't a weakness but a strength, even here, especially here, where survival depended on helping each other through winter storms and summer droughts. The cattle drive began at dawn the following day, 20 riders moving nearly 2,000 head of cattle eastward toward the railroad junction. Ethan rode Aurora, her training proving its worth as she responded to the slightest cues, maneuvering cattle with an intelligence that impressed even the most experienced cowboys. "That's some horse," Tom Rollins commented on the third day as they made camp by a shallow river. "Never seen a mare work cattle so well." "She's special," Ethan agreed, unsaddling Aurora and rubbing her down. "Not just any horse." "Heard she belongs to that doctor's daughter," another cowboy called from across the campfire. "Pretty little thing from what they say in town." Ethan kept his expression neutral, though his hand stilled momentarily on Aurora's flank. "Miss Grayson helped with her training. She has a way with horses." "Way I hear it," the cowboy continued, grinning. "She's got away with at least one cowboy too." The others laughed, but without malice. Ethan shook his head, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. News traveled fast in small communities. "Mind your business, Jenkins," he replied good-naturedly, returning to his task. "Just saying," Jenkins persisted. "A doctor's educated daughter could do worse than a foreman in training." This caught Ethan by surprise. "What are you talking about?" Tom Rollins looked up from his coffee. Marshall didn't tell you. He's considering you for foreman when I retire next spring, says you've got a good head on your shoulders. The news settled over Ethan with unexpected weight. Foreman meant more responsibility, better pay, and a more permanent position at the Double Cross. It was an honor he hadn't anticipated, and an opportunity that could advance his plans for independence considerably. As the drive continued, Ethan found his thoughts divided between the immediate demands of moving cattle across challenging terrain and dreams of what might await him upon his return to Pine Ridge. Letters were impossible from the trail, but he composed them in his mind during long hours in the saddle, all the things he wanted to tell Olivia, questions he wanted to ask, hopes he dared to contemplate. By the 10th day they had reached the halfway point of their journey, the railroad junction visible in the distance. That night, as the men bedded down after a hard day's drive, unusual cloud formations gathered on the horizon. "Don't like the look of that sky," Tom muttered, studying the western darkness. "Feels like a storm brewing." Ethan nodded, having noticed the same ominous signs. "Want me to take first watch?" "Might be best. Keep an eye on those clouds." The storm hit just after midnight, not the gentle rainfall they needed for dusty trails, but a violent tempest that turned the sky into a battlefield of lightning and thunder. Cattle, panicked by the sudden assault on their senses, began to stir restlessly in the darkness. "Riders up!" Ethan shouted, already mounting Aurora as the first animals broke from the herd. Stampede coming. What followed was chaos. 2,000 terrified cattle scattered in multiple directions, their hooves thundering across the prairie as cowboys scrambled to contain them. Rain lashed sideways, reducing visibility to mere feet, while lightning illuminated the scene in staccato flashes of ghostly white. Ethan and Aurora worked as one, cutting off groups of cattle, turning them back toward the main herd. The mare seemed to anticipate his every command, responding to the slightest pressure of his knees or shift of weight. In the midst of nature's fury, he found himself grateful for her training and for Olivia's contribution to it. The thought of Olivia gave him an extra surge of determination. He had promised to return to her, and he intended to keep that promise. As dawn broke, revealing a landscape transformed by mud and debris, the cowboys assessed the damage. Miraculously, they had lost only a small portion of the herd, though 2 men had sustained injuries, one a broken arm from being thrown, another a deep gash from a collision with a fallen tree branch. "Nearest doctor's a day's ride back," Tom said grimly, examining the wounded men. "Jenkins needs proper medical attention for that cut before infection sets in." Ethan made a quick decision. "I'll take him. Aurora's the fastest horse we've got, and I know where to find Dr. Grayson." Tom nodded. "Go, we'll continue with the drive, meet you at the junction if you can catch up." With Jenkins mounted behind him on Aurora, Ethan set off at a swift pace back toward Pine Ridge. The storm had cleared but left the trails muddy and treacherous. What should have been a day's journey stretched into nearly 2 as they navigated washed-out paths and swollen creeks. By the time they reached Pine Ridge, Jenkins was feverish, his wound angry and red despite their attempts to keep it clean. Ethan rode directly to Dr. Grayson's office, relief flooding through him at the sight of lamplight in the windows despite the late hour. "Dr. Grayson," he called, helping Jenkins dismount. "Need your help." The door opened immediately, revealing Olivia in a simple house dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. For a moment, despite the urgency of their situation, Ethan could only stare at her, the reality of her presence after days of merely remembering her face. Ethan, confusion gave way to concern as she saw Jenkins swaying on his feet. "Father, we need you." Dr. Grayson appeared behind her, immediately taking charge of the situation. "Bring him in." "Olivia, prepare the examination room." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Jenkins was laid on the examination table, his wound cleaned and stitched by Dr. Grayson's skilled hands while Olivia assisted, handling instruments and preparing bandages with practiced efficiency. Ethan watched from the doorway, struck by their teamwork and competence. Father and daughter moved in concert, communicating with minimal words, their focus entirely on saving the injured cowboy. When Jenkins was finally stabilized, medication administered for his fever and pain, Dr. Grayson turned to Ethan with a tired smile. He'll recover. The infection hadn't progressed too far, thankfully. You got him here in time. Thank you, sir, Ethan said sincerely. I didn't know where else to turn. You did exactly right, the older man clapped him on the shoulder. Now you look dead on your feet yourself. When did you last sleep? Ethan tried to remember. Before the storm, I think. That's what I thought. Olivia, make up the spare room for Mr. York. He's in no condition to travel further tonight. Olivia nodded, her eyes meeting Ethan's briefly. Of course. Follow me, please. She led him to a small but comfortable bedroom at the back of the house, lighting a lamp on the bedside table. There are clean towels on the chair, and I'll bring water for washing. Olivia, he said softly, stopping her as she turned to leave. I didn't expect to see you so soon. A smile touched her lips. Nor I you, though I confess I'm not sorry for it despite the circumstances. Nor am I, he hesitated, suddenly aware of his mud-splattered clothes and several days' worth of stubble. I must look a fright. You look like a man who's ridden through a storm to save his friend, she corrected gently. There's honor in that, not shame. Her words warmed him more than any fire could have. I missed you, he admitted, the exhaustion perhaps loosening his usual reserve. Out there during the storm, I thought of you. Color rose in her cheeks. I thought of you as well. Every day. The quiet confession hung between them, fragile and precious. Ethan wanted nothing more than to close the distance between them, to touch her cheek or take her hand, but propriety and his own state of dishevelment held him back. Rest now, she said, seeming to read his thoughts. Tomorrow is soon enough for conversations. He nodded, reluctantly accepting the wisdom of her words. Good night, Olivia. Good night, Ethan. Welcome back. Sleep claimed him almost immediately upon lying down, his body surrendering to days of accumulated exhaustion. He woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, momentarily disoriented until memory returned, the storm, Jenkins' injury, arriving at Dr. Grayson's house, Olivia. Rising quickly, he made use of the washing water and clean towels, doing his best to make himself presentable. His clothes were still travel-worn, but someone, Olivia, he presumed, had brushed the dried mud from his coat and laid out a clean shirt that must have belonged to Dr. Grayson. Gratefully changing into it, Ethan made his way to the main part of the house, following the scent of coffee and cooking. He found Olivia in the kitchen, her back to him as she tended something on the stove. Good morning, he said, pausing in the doorway. She turned, a smile brightening her features. With her hair pulled back in a simple braid and wearing a blue calico dress, she looked both familiar and somehow new, as though he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Good morning. I trust you slept well. Better than I have in weeks, he admitted. How is Jenkins? Improving. Father says the fever has broken and with proper rest he should recover fully. She gestured to the table where coffee and a plate of biscuits waited. Please sit, you must be hungry. As they shared breakfast, Ethan explained the circumstances of the cattle drive, the storm, and his decision to bring Jenkins back to Pine Ridge rather than continuing to the distant town near the railroad junction. It was the right choice, Olivia assured him. That wound needed immediate attention. I knew your father was the best doctor in the territory, Ethan said, then more softly, and I knew you would be here. Their eyes met across the table, unspoken feelings passing between them. Before either could speak further, however, Dr. Grayson entered the kitchen. Ah, Mr. York, good to see you up and about. He poured himself coffee, seemingly oblivious to the charged atmosphere. Your friend is asking for you. Says he needs to thank the man who saved his hide. Ethan spent the morning checking on Jenkins and seeing to Aurora, who had weathered their hard journey remarkably well. By afternoon, it was clear that Jenkins would need several days of recovery before he could travel. You should continue on, Jenkins told him from his sickbed, catch up with the others. No sense in both of us missing the completion of the drive. Ethan considered the suggestion. The responsible choice would be to rejoin the drive, help deliver the remaining cattle to their destination. But doing so would mean leaving Pine Ridge, leaving Olivia again so soon after returning. I'll think on it, he told Jenkins noncommittally. That evening, after dinner with the Graysons, Ethan found himself alone with Dr. Grayson in his study, the older man offered him a glass of whiskey which Ethan accepted gratefully. "Your quick thinking saved your friend's life," Dr. Grayson commented, settling into a worn leather chair. "Not every man would have made that choice." Ethan shrugged, it seemed the only option at the time. Nevertheless, the doctor studied him over the rim of his glass. "You know, my daughter speaks very highly of you." The sudden change in subject caught Ethan off guard. "Sir?" "Olivia is not easily impressed, Mr. York. She has had her share of suitors since her husband's passing, men of education and means, yet none have captured her interest as you have." Heat crept up Ethan's neck. "Doctor Grayson, I—" The older man waved away his stammering. "I'm not blind, young man. I see how you look at each other. What I want to know is what your intentions are." The directness of the question demanded equal honesty in response. Ethan set his glass down, meeting the doctor's gaze squarely. "Before leaving on the drive, I asked Olivia if I might call on her properly upon my return, with your permission, of course. And now I find myself reluctant to leave again so soon." Ethan took a deep breath. "Dr. Grayson, I care deeply for your daughter, more than I thought possible after such a relatively brief acquaintance. I had planned to court her properly, prove myself worthy of her regard, but life has its own timeline," the doctor finished for him, a knowing look in his eyes. "Just as death does. I learned that lesson when I lost my wife to influenza 15 years ago, and again when Olivia lost her husband." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Let me ask you this, Mr. York. What do you see for your future?" Ethan considered the question carefully. "I've been saving to buy my own land, build something lasting. Mr. Marshall has mentioned the possibility of a foreman position next spring, which would accelerate those plans." He hesitated, then added, "Recently, I've begun to imagine that future including Olivia, if she were willing." Dr. Grayson nodded slowly. "A worthy ambition, and Olivia. How does she fit into this vision of yours?" "As my partner," Ethan said without hesitation. "Not just a wife in the traditional sense, but a true companion. She's intelligent, capable, strong. Any man who failed to value those qualities would be a fool." A smile creased the doctor's weathered face. "Well said." He finished his whiskey and set the glass aside. "You have my permission to court my daughter, Mr. York. Though I suspect the decision is ultimately hers." "Thank you, sir." Relief and gratitude flooded through Ethan. "I promise to treat her with the respect she deserves." "See that you do." The warning was gentle but unmistakable. "Now about your dilemma regarding the cattle drive." "Yes, sir." "I have a proposition. Jenkins will require at least a week's recovery before he can travel safely. During that time, I could use assistance with various tasks around my practice and home. The building next door requires renovation before winter sets in if I'm to expand my services." Ethan caught his meaning immediately. "Are you offering me employment during Jenkins' recovery?" "Consider it a mutually beneficial arrangement. You ensure your friend recovers properly, assist me with necessary preparations for winter, and have time to clarify your relationship with my daughter." It was a generous offer, one that solved Ethan's immediate dilemma while providing an honorable reason to remain in Pine Ridge. "I accept, Dr. Grayson." "Gratefully." The next morning, Ethan dispatched a message to Tom Rollins via a passing freight wagon, explaining the situation and his decision to remain with Jenkins until he was fit to travel. With that responsibility addressed, he threw himself into the tasks Dr. Grayson had outlined, repairing the roof of the adjacent building, reinforcing windows against the coming winter, and constructing additional shelving for medical supplies. Throughout the week, he and Olivia found moments to be together, sometimes working side by side, other times taking short walks through Pine Ridge after her father's patients had gone for the day. Their conversations deepened, touching on hopes, fears, and shared dreams of the future. "Would you miss it?" Ethan asked as they sat on a bench outside the church one evening, watching the sun set behind distant mountains. "Town life, I mean, if you were to live elsewhere." Olivia considered the question, her green eyes reflecting the golden light. "I would miss certain aspects, the convenience perhaps. The sense of community. She turned to face him more directly, but I've never felt particularly attached to any one place since leaving Kentucky. Home, to me, has become more about people than location. The implication in her words gave him courage. And if home were a ranch several miles from town, with only occasional visitors and long winters? A smile curved her lips. Are you asking if I could be content as a rancher's wife, Ethan York? I suppose I am, he admitted, his heart pounding beneath his ribs. Though content seems a paltry ambition, I would hope for more than mere contentment for you. As would I. She reached for his hand, her fingers twining with his. The question isn't whether I could adapt to ranch life. It's whether we could build something meaningful together, wherever we might be. Ethan lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, the first such gesture between them. That's what I want, Olivia, to build something lasting. With you. Her eyes softened, a flush spreading across her cheeks. Then ask me properly, Cowboy. The gentle challenge in her voice made him smile. Setting aside his hat, Ethan shifted to face her fully, still holding her hand in his. Olivia Grayson, I find myself completely and utterly in love with you. Your intelligence, your strength, your compassion, everything about you has captured my heart in ways I never thought possible. His voice grew more confident with each word. I know our acquaintance has been relatively brief, but I cannot imagine my future without you in it. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears shimmered in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. Yes, Ethan York, I will marry you. Joy unlike anything he had ever known surged through him. With gentle reverence, he cupped her face in his hands and leaned forward to place a tender kiss on her lips, their first, sweet and promising, a beginning rather than an end. When they parted, Olivia's eyes remained closed for a moment, as though memorizing the sensation. I've waited for this, she whispered, for you. As have I, he replied, though until meeting her, he hadn't known what or whom he was waiting for. They returned to her father's house hand in hand, their future suddenly clear before them. Dr. Grayson, receiving their news with evident satisfaction, offered a toast to their happiness and immediately began discussing practical arrangements. You'll need your own place, of course, he said, refilling their glasses, though you're welcome to stay with me until suitable accommodations are arranged. Ethan exchanged a glance with Olivia. Actually, sir, I received word today from Mr. Marshall. In light of my actions during the storm, he's confirmed the offer of foreman position, effective immediately rather than next spring. It comes with use of the foreman's cabin on the Double Cross property. Excellent news, Dr. Grayson exclaimed. When do you take up the position? As soon as Jenkins is well enough to travel. We'd return to the ranch together. And the wedding? Olivia asked, a practical question despite the blush still coloring her cheeks. That's for you to decide, Ethan told her, though I admit I'm not inclined toward a long engagement. She smiled, squeezing his hand. Nor am I. 2 weeks, that would give us time for minimal preparations while allowing us to be settled before winter truly arrives. It was agreed 2 weeks hence they would be married in Pine Ridge's new church, with Dr. Grayson giving his daughter away and the Double Cross Ranch hands serving as witnesses. Word spread quickly through the small community, and soon Olivia found herself fielding offers of assistance from the wives of local shopkeepers and ranchers, women who had welcomed the doctor and his daughter and were delighted by the romantic match. Jenkins recovered steadily under Dr. Grayson's care, and by the end of the week was well enough to sit up and take short walks. The cowboys who had continued with the cattle drive returned, bringing news of a successful delivery and payment in full from the cattle buyer. Marshall's mighty pleased, Tom told Ethan as they shared a drink at Pine Ridge's small saloon. Says you're to report as soon as you're able to take up the foreman position. That will be after the wedding, Ethan replied, still marveling at how dramatically his life had changed in such a short time. Tom grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. Never thought I'd see the day, the solitary Ethan York tamed at last. Ethan chuckled, acknowledging the truth in the jest. Not tamed, Tom. Just finally found something worth settling for. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, the first hint of autumn gilding the leaves of cottonwood trees along the creek. In the small room behind the church that served as a bride's preparation area, Olivia stood in a simple but elegant white dress, a gift from Mrs. Marshall, who had insisted on providing it from her own cherished wedding gown, carefully preserved and restyled for the occasion. "You look beautiful," Dr. Grayson said, his voice thick with emotion as he entered to escort his daughter down the aisle. "Your mother would be so proud." Olivia blinked back tears, squeezing her father's hand. "Thank you for everything, Father. For bringing us west, for your support, for understanding. My dear girl, all I have ever wanted is your happiness." He offered his arm, "and I believe you have found it with that young man waiting for you." Ethan stood at the front of the church, heart pounding as he watched Olivia appear in the doorway on her father's arm. Her wheat blonde hair was arranged in an elegant twist, adorned with wildflowers, and her sage-green eyes found his immediately, holding his gaze as she walked toward him. In that moment, all his doubts about love and vulnerability on the frontier vanished. This woman, strong, intelligent, beautiful, was worth any risk, any challenge the harsh land might present. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows exchanged with clear voices and steady hands. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed his bride with a tenderness that belied the depth of his emotion, their future stretching before them like the endless Montana sky. The celebration afterward was a community affair, held at the Double Cross with Marshall's enthusiastic blessing. Tables were set up in the ranch yard, laden with food prepared by neighboring women. Fiddle music filled the air as cowboys and townsfolk alike danced and celebrated the union of the doctor's daughter and the ranch's new foreman. As evening fell, Ethan found a moment alone with his bride, drawing her away from the festivities to where Aurora was tethered, adorned with flowers for the occasion. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small velvet pouch. "It's not much, but—" Olivia opened it to find a delicate gold band set with a small emerald. "Ethan, it's beautiful." "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger alongside the simple gold wedding band. "The only thing I have left of her. The green reminded me of your eyes." She touched his face gently. "I will treasure it always." "There's something else," he gestured to Aurora. "She's yours, Olivia, she always was." Emotion welled in her eyes as she approached the mare, stroking her familiar blaze. "Thank you, but she trusts you now, too. Perhaps she belongs to both of us, like everything else in our future." Ethan wrapped his arms around his wife, drawing her close as they watched the celebration continue in the distance. "Our future," he repeated, savoring the words. "I like the sound of that." "As do I," she murmured, leaning back against his chest. "Though I must confess, when you first brought Aurora to the ranch, I never imagined this outcome." He chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Nor did I thought I was simply taming a wild horse. And instead I found that the truly free spirit belonged to a captivating woman, one who taught me that some wild things aren't meant to be tamed, but cherished for exactly what they are." Olivia turned in his arms to face him, her expression softening. "And what am I, Ethan York?" "Everything," he answered simply, "everything I never knew I was looking for until I found you." As twilight deepened to dusk, the newly married couple rejoined their celebration, surrounded by friends and well-wishers who had gathered to mark the beginning of their journey together. Later, they would retire to the foreman's cabin, their first home as husband and wife. In the coming years, they would face the challenges of frontier life together, harsh winters, summer droughts, the trials and joys of building a life from the raw materials of love and determination. But in this moment, as Ethan held Olivia's hand in his, watching her laugh at something Tom Rollins had said, he knew with absolute certainty that he had found his true north, the direction by which all other aspects of his life would now be oriented. The wild, lonely cowboy had indeed been transformed, not through taming, but through the far more powerful magic of being truly seen and accepted for who he was. And in that acceptance he had found not just love but home.